I'm gonna play you the vocals from one of Bad Bunny's most famous songs, and I want you to watch this number. Here's something crazy about this number. Every single hit vocal over the last 35 years is compressed to almost this exact same amount. Boys to Men, Garth Brooks, Beyonce, Bruno Mars, Lady Gaga. All of these tracks use almost this exact same number when it comes to vocal compression. But why? I analyzed every Billboard hit from the last 35 years, all 3,054 of them. And here's the thing about their vocals. They don't just average out to the same number. They all fit within one tiny window. I will absolutely show you how to get your vocals to fit into this window like the hits in a second. But before we do, let's describe and find out what this number actually means. 16 decibels is great, but 16 decibels of what? This number comes from the crest factor of a vocal itself. And if you've never heard of that word before, it's probably because you're a musician and not an electrical engineer. But don't worry, it's pretty easy to understand, and I've got a drawing to help explain it. All the crest factor is the difference between the highest peak of any vocal and then the average of the rest of the vocal, which I would guess probably is going to sit somewhere around there, maybe a little bit higher. The difference between these two is the crest factor itself. Peak minus the average, which in this case is RMS, will equal our crest factor. This isn't a perfect way of measuring compression, but it does give us a pretty good idea. The reason being that the more difference there is between the highest peak and the average, the more dynamic range a vocal signal would have. If we were to take this and squish it down with compression, you can see that this range is not the same as this range here. In other words, a lower crest factor, like what we have here, equals more compression. A higher crest factor equals more dynamics. We can use this as a proxy to see how much compression is being used on all of these hit vocals. To give you an idea of what this sounds like, let me play you some examples. This raw, unprocessed vocal has a crest factor of around 20. That I am, all comes from you. And this same vocal with a ton of compression makes the crest factor significantly smaller. This new crest factor is below 12. And all that I am, all comes from you. There's much less of a difference between the true peak and the RMS, or the average of the vocal signal. Note here that compression itself is more complicated than just crest factor. Crest factor is a proxy, but it doesn't exactly show us how much compression any audio engineer was using exactly. The final vocal compression comes from a variety of factors like saturation, clipping, and even limiting, and there's not really a good tool to determine what is affecting the signal in what way. But what's important about crest factor is the thing that will move the needle on it the most is the amount of compression, which is what I was looking at today. And guess what? Most hit vocals, according to our chart here, have compression. Problem solved. Hit vocals are compressed. Woo! It's not really crazy when I tell you that hit vocals are compressed, but what's more interesting about this chart itself is just how clustered they are together, around 16 decibels specifically. In fact, over 90% of 3,000 plus hit songs fall between 14 decibels of crest factor and 18. And 72% of them fall between 15 and 17. This gives a really good insight into how much compression you should have on your vocal itself. What's even more interesting about this chart is it held up almost regardless of the genre. Christian music had 15.4, rock had 15.6, alternative 15.9, country 16.0, electronic 15.9, Latin 16.2, pop 16.3, R&B 16.6, and finally the biggest with hip hop at 17.2. And I have a theory on this. I think most hip hop vocals are actually more compressed than what this leads you to believe. Anytime you have a lot of plosives or transients pushing that true peak higher, the crest factor is going to seem more dynamic. I think rap vocals have a lot of both of those. And beyond that, I know I just did a video on the #1 hit songs versus all of the rest. No, there was absolutely no correlation between the crest factor or vocal compression and where something placed on the charts. Now, here's the obvious objection. Maddie, how did you get these studio vocals? I didn't. I don't have the studio vocals And almost nobody in the world does, except if you're like David Guetta, or Rick Beato probably has them. But what I did do instead was use AI to stem separate all of the vocals from their original tracks. I was a little weary of using these stem separated vocal tracks, so I ran it through some additional tests to make sure the numbers held up. And one of the biggest things I thought that helped prove that this number was probably accurate, at least in the ballpark of the original vocals, was that there was a huge difference between the vocal mix, the instrumental mix, and the full mix itself when it came to crest factor calculations. And then, just to be extra careful that these numbers did make sense, I used a separate AI stem separator to double check the numbers. First program I used was called Demux. The second one I used is called Kim's Vocal 2, which came out as my favorite stem separator, which you can find out from the AI stem separator comparison video I did wherever you can find it. The two different algorithms actually agree to a sixth of a decibel, which made me feel more confident in sharing this with you. It's looking pretty good that if you can get your vocals to 16 decibels of crest factor, they're going to be properly compressed like the hits are. But before you go and just put 16 decibels on all your vocals the entire song, there is another part of the equation that we have to talk about. At a small scale over a small period of time, the hits agree on these vocals being around 16 decibels. From word to word, from syllable to syllable, and phrase to phrase, the volume doesn't change all that much. But there is one part where the crest factor varies dramatically, and that's when you zoom out into the entire song and go from the verse, say, to the chorus. The majority of songs usually add more energy, more voices, more vocals, and more volume to the chorus itself. And that can create a big change in crest factor. In fact, the swing from a verse to a chorus ranged anywhere from 17 to 50 plus. On a micro level, it's important to find that 16 decibels. But when you get to the chorus and you're adding in 8, 12, 20 more voices, all of those transients can build up together and exaggerate the crest factor even more. Don't worry about that number specifically on the entire track itself. Focus more on the 16 decibels for individual tracks. Listen to what it sounds like when you have a low crest factor and you're over compressing a lot of the chorus.
I don't care, go on and tear me apart.
Don't get me wrong, this song is mixed really well, but this is one of the hits that had the lowest crest factor that there was. And now let's listen to the opposite. Let's listen to one of the most dynamic crest factors, and you can hear the difference in the vocals themselves.
I feel like I wanna go home. It's okay.
There is a balance between making that vocal tight and upfront and easily heard by adding more compression and maintaining the actual life and energy of the original vocal performance. That's where this 16 decibels kind of converges. It seems to be a nice, even middle number. All of that is great and well and good, but what does that mean for you? What do you have to do to get your vocals to land in this compression pocket? First things first, we need to measure our crest factor. It's gonna be hard to get our vocals to get in the actual right zone if we have no idea what we're working with. There are some free tools that you can download as plugins to get a better idea of what this will be. The plugin I'd recommend is Voxengo Span. I will note that these do show a variant of crest factor, but not the exact thing that I'm talking about in this video. For example, Voxengo Span shows max crest factor, which is the max RMS minus RMS. And Voxengo Span also computes the silence of your vocal itself. It doesn't just have the voiced parts. And when you include the silence in your vocal, that's going to make your crest factor higher. In other words, it's just not going to be as accurate. But there is another free option that I've helped develop that you can find for free on my website. It is a web vocal analyzer that you can use to get a much better idea of the crest factor of your voice. It also uses the same exact algorithm that I use in this 16 decibel chart that I'm showing you. And just like what I was talking about, it will only measure your voiced parts and not the silent parts, so it's not going to mess anything up, but it will give you your crest factor so that you can begin to adjust it as you want to. This free analyzer will also show you some EQ moves. It will give you some suggestions on what you can do to make it sound better, even plugin chains and more. And once you have your crest, we can do the rest. We'll first start off our vocal with vocal riding. If you have a dynamic vocal, you'll want to adjust the loudest parts and the softest parts so that they're more similar before any compression at all. Every pro is doing this, and I promise you it's going to give you much better results. This can be a really time-consuming process, going through every single syllable individually, turning them up or down, depending. However, I have another solution for you, and shameless plug, I built an entire plugin that will help do this for you called Magic Ride. It will automatically see the volume level of your vocal and adjust it accordingly so that it's more even throughout. Link in description. And once your vocal is pretty much level, then I'd recommend using compression. Now you may get to the proper compression levels with just vocal riding alone, but I do like to add a little bit more compression to glue things together after the fact. Here's a good compression starting point you can use. Change to an FET or an 1176 type compressor. Adjust the ratio so it's 4:1 or 3:1. Set the attack to around 15 milliseconds, and then adjust the threshold down until you're getting around 5 decibels of gain reduction. Then duplicate that compressor so that we have 2 compressors working in sequence. And then finally, to get the closest comparison, let's add a limiter. You can either add this directly on the track, but more often than not, I'll keep it on my stereo out bus as a dirty master, if you will. This video is not about mastering, but just know that we're comparing a limited mastered signal to this, so we want to include it. Then once we go back and put it in the vocal analyzer, we'll see our new crest factor, which is a whopping bum ba da bum bum ba. And all that I am, all comes from you. Right in the pocket. Then just keep going back and forth between your analyzer and your compressor until you get into that pocket range that I was talking about, 14 to 18 decibels. And as you're working on your vocal, please don't forget that just because you have a crest factor or a compression number that sits in the right range that it hits to does not mean that your vocal is gonna sound good. It's one piece of an equation that has so many variables, and I'd really encourage you to get the feeling and the vibe of the vocal right before worrying about the nitty-gritty numbers like this. One thing to mix a vocal perfectly like the hits do and get this number dead in the pocket. But it's another thing to have a vocal that actually moves you. I'll see you in the next one.